Drogas para todos, sin ángeles ni demonios. Si este es el primer episodio que escuchan, bienvenidos, muchas gracias, y les ruego que intenten escuchar el primer episodio, muy corto, donde explico cuál será la idea y el objetivo, la motivación del podcast. Este episodio va a ser un poco extraño, pero espero que interesante. Voy a dar una muy breve introducción y después voy a pegar un extracto de una charla de Terence McKenna. Esa charla es en inglés, pero en un inglés bastante sencillo, así que espero que se animen a escucharlo e intentar entenderlo. Para los que no saben quién es Terence McKenna fue un escritor, filósofo, pero sobre todo un orador. Él dio muchas charlas al respecto de los beneficios de las plantas psicodélicas, con una visión muy mística muchas veces. Y por eso creo que esta charla es interesante porque es distinta, es un poco una visión más conservadora, más cautelosa. Habla un par de veces sobre unos ataques psicóticos de él mismo o de su hermano, de cómo se define la locura y de qué tanto los psicodélicos pueden llevar a eso, pasando por supuesto, como en todas sus charlas, por varias de sus teorías no probadas sobre distintos temas. Tiene una prosa muy interesante, muy convincente, una manera de hablar, un muy buen orador. Y más allá de la rigurosidad científica o no de cualquier parte de esta charla, creo que es muy interesante escuchar esta parte un poco más cautelosa de una persona que fue famosa por ser muy pro psicodélicos. En el episodio anterior comenté un par de frases bastante conocidas. Una de ellas es: hay que abrir la mente, pero no tanto como para que se caiga el cerebro. Y otra es: una vez que recibes el mensaje, cuelga el teléfono. Y creo que esta charla viene en línea con esos mensajes y justamente de una persona conocida por su proselitismo al respecto de los psicodélicos. Así que bueno, nada más por mi parte, espero que disfruten esta Drogas para todos, sin ángeles ni demonios, charla de Terence McKenna.
What I'm always afraid of is that I'll be ostracized, except that it'll be entirely deserved. In other words, that going off the deep end into some kind of appropriate behavior. The word that I would use over and over again is disgrace, that it would disgrace everything. And it's gotten weird for me because there used to be nothing to disgrace because there was no reputation. Now I'm always aware that, if I go bananas, then people will say, what happened to that guy? You think this is good? You read these books? Did you hear how this guy ended up? So then it's all ruined. It's like they're saying about Woody Allen, his entire work must now be reassessed. And you think, oh God, what if that were me? Your entire work needs to be reassessed. And it's interesting to think about madness, or what we're calling madness. I mean, the religious thing is the one that overcomes me or overcame me. That's how I imagine I would go. And even as it is, I'm practically a repent, the end is nigh person. I mean, it's all couched in, we have the computer and the mathematics and the dazzling, rhetoric. But it's basically a the end is nigh rap of some sort. And yet I'm very intolerant intellectually. I mean, there are perfectly harmless, functioning people that I, in my own mind, consider crazy simply because of what they believe. I mean, one way of thinking about crazy is it's just you have looser rules of evidence than the rest of us. So, and in a society falling to pieces like ours, where nobody has a very firm grip on what's going on, if you're nuts, but you're not sure you're nuts, you just have to get 10 people to believe you, and suddenly you're a method, a school, a point of view. You're not nuts anymore. You're invited to teach your insanity and show others the way. But I think there's an unmistakable threshold that when I think people who are insane in the way that you're concerned about and that I'm concerned about know it. It's not something, and I think Dick was the great exemplar in this area. I mean, he was nuts and he knew it, and he managed it and worked with it and got juice out of it and was sometimes overwhelmed by it, because it's a feeling, don't you think? That it transcends intellectualizing. One can believe all kinds of odd things, but there's a certain existential intensity that overcomes you, and then you are crazy or insane, because it's almost like with psychedelics or practices that are very powerful, you do begin to rise through some kind of spiritual domain. But if you're unbalanced slightly to one side or the other, you'll start to skew, and it'll get worse and worse, and it will feed back negatively into your life. And insanity is a kind of like a divine madness of some sort. I mean, it's not clear what it is exactly. I mean, I think people really do touch extraordinary states. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I haven't seen like hundreds of people who were diagnosed as mad. But these people who go off the deep end with religious ideas and so forth, it seems to me there's more going on than a disintegrating psychology, because it's always accompanied by events in the real world which reinforce the crazy assumption. It's like, from the point of view of the person who is undergoing this, there's ample evidence always at hand that they're not crazy, that this is really happening. I remember when I was at my most unreclaimable, one of the things I would do, it was in the Amazon, and very fortunately, because modern mental health care delivery systems couldn't reach me, and so I survived it, but otherwise I doubt that I would have, because when they drug you and interrupt these cycles of whatever this is, then it's very hard to ever get straight again. But the form that my madness would take, on one level, was I would go alone into the jungle, and I could call butterflies to me, which was a strange thing because I had earlier made my living as a butterfly collector. And so I would just, like St. Francis, I would go out and hold up my hands, and the butterflies would come and descend and walk on my hands. And I would, oh yes, no, this happened. Nobody was there but me, and we can even create an explanation that I was able to generate an odor or something that brought them in. But so then I would have like an epiphany. It would prove to me my divine nature and my divine mission, and so forth and so on. And so then I would sink to my knees, the butterflies surrounding me, and weep with ecstasy that I had been granted this sign, and then weep a little more, but then the mind would begin to wander, and then I would think about how but nobody else is getting the benefit of this miracle. And so then I would dry my tears and go look for somebody to show this to. And then I would take these people who were by now fairly concerned about my state of mind anyway, and I would insist that they walk with me into the jungle, and then I would hold out my arms to the skies expecting butterflies to descend and envelop me, and of course nothing would happen. And then people would just turn away, aghast at such a display of hubris, ego, fucked up, delusory, just that you'd lost it, you would become unbearable, egomaniacal. And then you say, but no, listen, it's really true. And then it's even more pathetic. And so there are, cycles of distancing that go on. I don't know. I think in the course of a life lived to its fullest, most people have passed through these places on some level or another. Is that generally agreed upon? Is this totally wild territory to everybody here, or no? No, it's pretty,
But I'm raising the issue of leaving, not exactly passing through, but, for myself, leaving something unresolved that still needs to be integrated. And I imagine you have this with places that you've been to, Terence, where there's, in some way, it's not resolved, and to go, and my fear is to explore too much is a ticket to a crazy bomb of some kind.
Well, leaving consensus. I mean, I think it's true that, with psychedelics, the practice works too well almost, in that it will, if you insist on, I don't want to use the word abusing it, but if you insist on using psychedelics frequently at high doses, back to back, you will unlock your way into a set of assumptions and perceptions and feelings that not very many people can follow you into. And then the question is, have you gone into a spiritual domain, or have you just fallen off the track? And it's hard to tell, and maybe it can happen both ways. It's so hard to convey the mind of the schizophrenic. I mean, people who we call crazy do not seem to themselves to be crazy. They look at the world from a different perspective and through a different logic, but they're trying to make sense of it. It's just that the data that they're trying to handle is extremely alien from what the rest of us use. I mean, I can remember when I was in these states that I would it's so hard to explain, but I would see waves of historical association out of my past. I mean, it's like I would be in a small town in Colombia, but something it would be as though there was another time, a time from my past, overlaid over everything. And so a waitress serving me in a restaurant, a hotel keeper, would also be another person in another time, in another place, with a set of associations to me. And I had a friend, actually, who became schizophrenic and did get electroshock and the whole 9 yards. And he said, what you have to do, what you must do, is learn to shut up. Do not run around. And there's a compulsion to confess as well. This is not easy, because there's something about these perceptions that have to be communicated. And yet when you communicate them, people are appalled. They do not know how to handle it. I remember when my brother did what he called turning inside out. And, he didn't know whether he was Agnes or Angus. And there was some intimation of some psychosexual transformation. It wasn't clear whether it was like a transsexual operation or the metamorphosis of an insect or something else. And, he's saying this, I mean, I don't know. I suppose we can multiply these examples endlessly. In thinking about this talk, for me personally, what it comes down to is somehow, And I don't know the how, but the issue is clear, I think. It's an issue of courage and of failure of nerve. You have to be willing to put yourself on the line. And it's all tied into what we always talk about in these circles, which is the ego, and how the ego's final defense against its own dissolution is telling you that you're either going mad or dying. And in the psychedelics, you can usually defeat the dying rap, because you just have to have the faith that you're not dying on 15 milligrams of psilocybin. It's highly unlikely, not impossible, but you can argue that it's unlikely. But when it tells you you're going mad, you have nothing to stand on, because you can't tell. Who knows? I mean, what is the effective dose of psilocybin for triggering madness? The question doesn't even exist back in the world you left behind. And the only way Shakespeare says, screw your courage to the sticking point. The only way I've found to deal with this is the rough, personally speaking, the absolutely rough, straight-ahead way, which is after putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, I finally just say, oh, fuck it, do it, if that's what you want to do, if you want to destroy me, do it. But it requires, it's a kind of recklessness. I can't find a calm place in which to meet it. I can only meet it if I force myself to assume that it's going to leave me high and dry. I remember a psychotherapist who I don't want to name, but who used psychedelics very extensively for years and years and turned on hundreds of people and with combinations and all kinds of stuff. Toward the end of his life, it grew harder and harder and harder for him to take it. And when I asked him why, he said, I always have bad trips. And we talked about it, whether that it was, that just a lifetime of tripping other people had done this, or whether maybe as you pass a certain age, it doesn't do the same thing, it becomes darker and darker, or whether it was something in his personality. I really resist the idea that you could ever get to the place where you say, as some people love to say, psychedelics, I took them, don't need them anymore, learned what it has to offer. But one excuse that I use in my own inner rhetoric is that, sitting here in this moment, I can really strongly imagine what it's like to be stoned on any one of these things. It doesn't feel remote to me anymore. And I don't know whether that's a delusion and an excuse for not doing it, or whether my thresholds are getting lower. I don't know. I was in London a few weeks ago and at a party, and I was the guest of honor, and they brought out last year's Welsh mushrooms and made a big tea for everybody, and the hostess said, it's just almost like a gesture. I mean, there are so many of us and so few mushrooms, but we'll each just get a little bit. Well, so I was first out of the chute, and I was, I don't know whether it all pooled on the top in one place or what was going on, but I just sat down on the ground, and this guy who said, some person of great reputation who said he'd wanted to meet me for years and years, was sitting in front of me trying to get to know me. And finally he said, "You're flaming, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I can't carry on this conversation. I just have to hold on to the grass." Well, I don't know what all this means. I don't want to become afraid of it, and I blame myself. I don't think the thing has a negative edge unless you've somehow come out of jiggle with it. And I don't know whether that means, what does it mean if it becomes harder and harder to take these things? Does it mean you're getting out of balance? Does it mean you're just getting older? Where should the blame be put? And then what can you do about it? The only thing I found to do about it is stop running and turn and face it. But each time I do that, it seems to require the very limit of my courage. And I don't know how long one's courage lasts. Maybe it's not a bad thing. I mean, after all, people who climb mountains, like Mount Everest, they don't do it till their dying day. At some point, they, knock off and become a consultant for a sportswear manufacturer or something. Well, what does anybody else think about any of this?
I'm getting agitated.
Oh.
I'm getting really agitated because, I don't know even what you're talking about, except that you're talking about having your mushrooms and you're having these experiences. And I've never taken drugs in my life, ever. And I've had just normal, or just abnormal, kind of breaks since I was 15. And I'm having these things, and I'm not eating anything, it just comes on, and it's very scary for me. And from the time, and David, I really feel for what you were saying, because I'm scared to death. Because since I was like 15 and, in high school, and then they sent me to the hospital, and psychiatrists got hold of me 35 years ago and did a number on me. And, quickly I learned that when the experience comes and that I get scared, I go back to that doctor, and I did that until I came to Esalen 7 years ago. And when I came here, I came to meet Dick and work with him, and I asked him to work with me, and he took me under his wing for 6 weeks and worked with me every other day. And what I had then, David, was I had permission to go through it, and he was going to be there with me. And then Dick died. We hiked Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Monday, he said to me, "Are you ready to go up here by yourself? Because, pretty soon you have to go alone." And I said, I don't want to go alone. I just want to be with you. And then on Wednesday, he died. And I'm haunted by that because, I keep coming back to Esalen, and they say, "Well, Dick's dead now. This is not the place for you to go through that." And I said, "Well, where in the fuck is the place to go? Because there's so many people here that want to go through to this other side. I don't want to do it living in my van on the streets in San Diego. It's not about me telling people my experience. Sometimes the actions look pretty bizarre to the people out on the streets, and I get to the point where then they, they're alarmed and they call me away." Mm-hmm. Right, and I'm not walking around telling them that, so it's like, okay, if I'm living away from Esalen, well, even at Esalen now, because last year I was having a break, and I went to jail in the lodge, and I was really scared, and I was reaching out, and she said, "Well, why don't you go to a movie in town for a few hours and then see," and that was the wrong thing to say, so I terrified and somehow ended up in San Diego in the hospital, got on some new kind of medication, and that's been the pattern too. But when Dick was here and I felt like there was, a support to go through it, that felt okay, and then now when it comes up, I do get scared, and I don't go through it like you just suggested. I go back and, take a drug. And I haven't been on a drug for 10 months now, and I'm back here, and I'm terrified that when it comes up, I'm going to have to run away. I don't feel a support anymore here. And what haunts me is that Dick wanted to have that. That was his dream. I know he's dead and it's not his place anymore. But, his dream was to have a sanctuary where, right down there in that canyon. And he talked to me for 6 weeks about, putting me in on the deal. And, I'd be the first one he turns loose in there like they did with him. And that you wander around and have all kinds of experiences. And then if you come out fine, if you don't come out, they could ship you off up the highway somewhere until you're...
Well, but in fact, most people came out fine, I think. No, all these drugs, these antipsychotic drugs, are basically warehousing strategies for the convenience of doctors. because the only way that works with people who have this problem is so labor intensive and so demanding. I mean, what you need basically is 6 people to watch you, some to hold your hand and reassure you, some to physically grab you and sit on you when you head for the hills. Very few people get through it without being messed with. Like I say, I think I was lucky and my brother was lucky because some force, some intuition led us to get so far out that they couldn't find us. You know, they literally couldn't come and get us. R.D. Lang, as well as Dick, had this idea that people have to go through it.
But not everybody can go to the... I can't right now go to the jungle. I mean,
You've got to have some kind of a support group. And if you don't have a support group, then you have to stay away from people who will mess with it. And, you know, it's hermit time, if nothing else. Yeah.
There are several places now open. One is called Pocket Ranch in Geyserville.
It's $475 a day, and I've been crazy since I'm 15, so I can't even get insurance that would even pay for that. So it's kind of for people that are rich.
No scholarshiping? I don't know that.
No, they don't have anything. Because Steve gave me some brochures when I found out about that. You know, and Medicare doesn't pay for that. I mean, I'm on disability for psychiatric problems, you know, from Social Security, and they don't pay for shit, you know, which is good in a way, because I don't get too many drugs that way to cover it.
Well, you know, it's hard to tease apart whether you've got... I mean, I think it's amazing to me that at Esalen that we're discussing insanity. It's even, I think, a kind of an old-fashioned word. I mean, you'd think this would be the thing they would have worked through here. Isn't that what... I mean, it was Steve who said to me once, you'll understand this place a lot better if you think of it as a kind of hospital. And I've, you know, looked at it like that ever since. We have all these therapists. The greats have come and gone, of 3 schools now, and we don't understand it. So what can we expect from the rest of society? I mean, when I was schizophrenic, if this is what we're talking about, my feeling about it was, and maybe this is, if not true, a delusion worth playing with, is I thought, what we call mental illness, what we call schizophrenia, and what we look into the body or the mind or the personal history or the dream state to try and understand and possibly cure, it's not like that at all. It isn't if you're the person who's nuts, it isn't your problem. It's something that's happened to you. Not more fundamentally than catching the flu. It's like you just happened to step in some cosmic doo-doo, and now it's on the bottom of your shoe, and everybody's pointing at you and backing up, but it isn't your fault. It was just happened to be in your path. It's a kind of, it's a horrible piece of luck, unless you can turn it to your own advantage. And what that means, I think, is obviously integrating it. Well, then how do you integrate these things? I think it has to do, again, a lot with where you start from. Just speaking from my own personal experience, what saved me was my cynicism, that I didn't believe in anything, never had always thought believing in things was a bad idea. So then when this whole cosmos of beliefs was handed to me on a platter, I just simply said, maybe, I'll act it out, but I won't believe it. And I think that had I been a good Mormon, a good Catholic, a good Buddhist, a good something else, then I would have been lost. because I would have traded whatever it was I believed for the new set of beliefs. As it was, I just said, what's this? Beliefs. I don't do that. But I played with it, and somehow the playing with it was able to depotentiate it. I had a conversation with someone very recently who, by ordinary standards, I think would have to be considered nutty as a fruitcake. And, they could hardly speak of their condition without being swept by an emotion that was so intense that it reduced them to tears, And I said, if you're going to be this nuts, you should enjoy it more. It's too... And they said, I am enjoying it. And I said, well, I'm not enjoying it because you're just projecting such an emotional intensity that it makes me very nervous. And I think I speak then for the sane general masses about that. What makes it hard for the person who's going through this is that it's so hard for other people. I mean, it's freaky to be around somebody who's crazy. I don't, because I'm such a purveyor of psychedelics, people are forever leaning on me to trip with them. And I dare say, there are people in this room who've known me for years, and no one here can say they've ever been seriously loaded with me, because I just don't do it. I can't take it. I can't handle the feeling of risk that permeates that. That's why it amazes me. I'm fascinated by people who have such faith in their knowledge that apparent difficult situations don't freak them out. As an example, some of you know Frank Barr. He's an emergency room doctor. And I'm amazed that he can deal with people who are dead out unconscious and just say, she'll come to in 40 minutes or so, don't worry about that. When I would be frantic. I mean, if I can't get a reaction out of somebody, I just go berserk. And the notion, I don't know whether that's a kind of callousness. Therapists are like that. I mean, they say, you come upon somebody flopping around on the floor, screaming, pleading, weeping. My inclination is to make them feel better, for God's sake. And a therapist would just say, well, they're working through their stuff. It's all right, How do you get that level of self-confidence where you can see somebody in agony and say, that's all right, it's the best thing for them. Check on them in an hour and see where they're at. It's awfully... so I stay away from it. And in my own situation, I keep people away from me. I've had many trips where I've thought in the middle of it, thank God there's no one here to see this. Because if there were someone here to see it, I'm sure they would become alarmed and decide that some crisis was in progress. And, ultimately you have to sort of get a kind of perspective where you just say, if I die, I die. But it usually has to slam you to the wall pretty severely to make you turn. The image I have is that I run from it until I become so furious at this humiliating situation that I turn and face it. And then, if you curse it, it will step back sometimes. And it's worked every time. The other thing is, the wonderful instinct for equilibrium that the human mind has, that you can get pretty twisted around. And if you'll wait 24 hours, 72 hours, 10 days, 6 months, it will restore to equilibrium. I'm puzzled by the cases of permanent raving madness, and I wonder how common they are. It's all messed up in this society. I mean, I can show you psychiatric residents who have never seen an unmedicated schizophrenic in their entire life, you know, because they just do not encounter people in that state. What they deal with are people who come in and been given drugs and kept on drugs and drugs. That's the whole dynamic.
Terence, I'm thinking about the last person here that the community really got behind, sitting poor through a state of it. I'm wondering how much to say because she's not here, but perhaps the reason we don't know more about this is, as you say, how many psychiatric residents have ever seen somebody who's not on a caretaking drug. Mm-hmm. And the amount of energy it took for the community to mobilize to take care of this person was pretty overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It takes a team of 6 to 12 people.
Day in and day out.
Day in and day out, and this went on for 10 days or so.
Oh, 30 days. 30 days.
And was there a resolution that was satisfying?
There was a resolution of sorts, but the thing that I was most impressed with is in a psychiatric ward, among people who didn't know the person, you would have assumed that all these associations were meaningless stuff, and that the person had been in, and the review of the material, it all made sense in a particular way. And that would be completely missed. There was definitely a way that a lot of stuff was being worked through, maybe not to satisfaction, but on some level, that you couldn't possibly know unless you knew this person very, very well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw with my brother. I mean, when my brother went bananas, I sat, and, you know, it was a complicated case because there was something wrong with me in the sense that I didn't sleep for 11 days. But he raved day and night. And what in every single thing was, or to my mind, at least 90% of it was incredibly interesting and revelatory. He imitated every relative. He imitated music teachers not dealt with since age 6. He revealed vast scenarios of stuff going on in the town where we had grown up together. Well, if he had been straitjacketed in a ward somewhere, they would have just thought that this was garbage, and what it actually was, you know, brilliant, insightful, almost literarily deep stuff. And the other thing is, I've always thought, you know, that a mental ward, I don't understand the thinking of the psychiatric community. A mental ward is my idea of an environment designed to drive you crazy. I mean, because crazy people drive me crazy. Just one who is very slightly crazy is unbearable. And to be put into a ward with people wandering around, and I really think it's a pheromonal, I don't want to go as far as some people have gone and say that schizophrenia is entirely a pheromonal disorder. But do you know what I'm talking about here? Well, some people say that that we have left over from earlier stages of evolution all kinds of physiological systems that produce odors that we are not consciously aware of, but that like set the ambiance for social interaction, because we are, after all, social animals. We're as social as honeybees or something. And all social animals regulate behavior through pheromones. And it's known, for instance, that when a person walks into a crowded room, instinctively the first thing they do is they take a deep breath. And it's thought that this is a whole bunch of chemical messengers are coming in saying, you know, people have been drinking, one couple isn't getting along, somebody's on the make, so all this stuff is going on, and you get this gestalt in one single moment. Well, then, because of a phenomenon that's fairly common called allophenia, which is where your friend gets committed to a mental hospital for schizophrenic behavior, and you buy a book and take it to them and visit them, and while visiting, you behave so oddly that you're not allowed to leave. Allophrenia, schizophrenic behavior by non-schizophrenic persons in the presence of schizophrenia. It's thought that perhaps what schizophrenia is an odor malfunction where the person who is becoming schizophrenic is literally beginning to smell funny. And this causes the people around them to begin to send the wrong signal, which begins to activate anxiety in the schizophrenic person, which accentuates the production of the pheromones. So then people start saying, you know, that guy's really weird. He's so weird. Well, then the person picks up on this. And what's happening, your word, ostracized. They're being pushed to the periphery of the social thing. And they feel it's unfair because they and the people doing it don't know why they're doing it. And what's happening is it's a horrible misunderstanding, and it ends in making somebody completely dysfunctional because they don't know, they've lost their place in the net. They literally don't know who they are.